So this is what you call vaccine success? Since the sweeping of the Delta variant, a very highly transmissible mutant form of COVID-19 over the last month and a half, really getting going the late part of May and then sweeping through and now being almost 100% of US cases. The fanfare around the effectiveness of vaccines, not only to reduce infection and to reduce hospitalization, has been seriously challenged. We're going to take a look at that in this video, not again as a pro-vax or anti-vax position, but to look at the risks and benefits and the changing landscape of this very much changing virus. It is real, it is getting around, and it's causing problems for everyone. If you're a pro-vaxxer or an anti-vaxxer as an ideological position, you're going to find yourself challenged on both accounts. What we're going to try to do in this video is actually create a much more balanced, even-handed notion of what works and what doesn't, looking in a more nuanced way, not at just unvaccinated versus vaccinated, but unvaccinated people who've been exposed to COVID and developed natural immunity, those who have not been exposed to COVID before getting their vaccination shots and what happened to them, and those who were unvaccinated and unexposed. Many of them happen to be kids now because kids are not available, at least 12 and under, for any kind of vaccination. But we'll do an entirely separate video on that to see if that's really a concern by simply looking at the cases. So let's go ahead and put me in the corner here and really look at what's going on here. We'll go ahead and get to the first video here, or first page that I want to get a hold of. Here it is. Study of fully vaccinated people with breakthrough COVID Delta infections carry as much virus as the unvaccinated. Delta changed the game. So many things were going well for these vaccines, but they had a particular problem. They were built around the spike protein, which is the part that attaches to cells and helps the virus get into our lungs, get into our our throat passages, and eventually begin to replicate within cells and go throughout our bodies. When the Delta variant came around, that spike protein had mutated enough that it was creating wholesale changes in the effectiveness of vaccines. And now what we're beginning to find is that more and more breakthrough cases in which fully vaccinated people are not only getting infected, but passing it on to other people. And we're also beginning to see an uptick in hospitalizations as well. So let's take a look at that, again, in a fairly non-biased way, except those biased toward the facts. And I wanted to start off with this rather interesting article in The Atlantic. I see it as almost a sign of the times. When one person is ideologically committed towards seeing vaccines as only good and the answer to every question regarding any kind of infection, you come up with headlines like this: Delta is bad news for kids. More kids are falling ill because more are being infected. Now, what's interesting about this, you would think this would be an article that says unvaccinated or trying to make a case for vaccination of kids. It kind of tries to do that, but the story it tells actually brings the opposite implication. So if we go down, I just have to read this. I'll have to read the first two paragraphs here because it's just almost too incredibly odd to be believed. Here we go. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and bring this on up so that you can see the actual article itself. I'll move the frame upward here. Come on. All right. That doesn't want to go up. So 2.5 weeks ago, the next school year approached. A pediatric cardiologist from Louisiana headed into the Georgia mountains with her husband, their 3 children, and their extended family. It was, in many ways, a fairly pandemic-sanctioned vacation. All 9 adults in attendance were fully vaccinated. The group spent most of the trip outdoors, which is not a place where people normally transmit the disease, biking, swimming, and hiking, doing very healthy activities, in other words. Then, let's go ahead and move my picture over so you can see the text fully here. Then, on the last night of the outing, July 27th, the same day the CDC pivoted back to asking vaccinated people to mask up indoors, one parent started feeling sick. So one of the vaccinated adults started feeling sick. The test soon confirmed a mild breakthrough case of COVID-19. None of the other adults caught the coronavirus on the trip, the cardiologist told me, which she pointed to as total proof that the vaccine worked, except for that person who caught it. But within a week, 6 of the 8 kids on the trip, all of them too young to be eligible for the vaccine, had newly diagnosed corona infections as well. The infected group included, so again, 6 of the 8 kids got COVID. Again, it seems like they were basically mild symptoms as well, so I'm not sure how that proves that vaccines are needed for young kids or that there's a big danger, big trouble for them. But look at this story. Here you have a group of all fully vaccinated adults going in an outdoor trip, which is very difficult to, I guess you would say, transmit the virus, unless, of course, one of those people gets sick, that is one of the vaccinated, and is in a tent, which has very limited circulation. That's probably where it was passed, and then end up passing it to 6 out of the 8 kids. That does not seem to me like a vaccine success story. It seems to me that that is something that's the opposite of success. Now, I won't actually say it, and it rhymes with frailer, the word, because when I used that term, which is straight out of a CDC slideshow that was leaked, I had my previous video banned. So I have to be somewhat careful about the words using. That's why I've now made the title, so you call this vaccine success ? Because I'm going to essentially, to a certain degree, question but also lampoon the contortions that people are going to try to defend a position, either pro-vax or anti-vax. Once again, vaccines are a tool. They have been a tool used to save lives, but they are also just a tool. They can also take lives, and that is the problem. They did in a dengue vaccine in which 600 kids out of 100,000 vaccinated were essentially killed by antibody-dependent enhancement. We know that it can, and we know that it can also save lives. So the task is not to be pro-vax or anti-vax. The task is to actually look at the data and understand where things are going, which vaccines are effective, which are not, what are the risks, and whether or not natural immunity is a better option than perhaps vaccinated immunity. So let's go forward on that exploration. Here is the latest also, and I say latest, this is probably a little over a month old, but it started again when the Delta variant became full force in Israel. What did they find in Israel? They found out that natural infection versus vaccination, natural infection gave nearly 7 times greater protection from getting infected than vaccination. We'll talk a little bit about the reasons for that, but just in general, you have to understand that these vaccines were very, very specific. They were targeted to a spike protein which mutated. Natural infection tends to be much more comprehensive in the way that it comes at immunity. It has a lot more equipment arrayed toward the T cells and B cells, and T cell memory from previous infections and cross immunity, among a whole array of tools. Whereas artificial immunity, I guess you would call it, or technologically induced immunity, that is vaccines, tend to be much more specific. We are not nearly as wise as the 4.5 billion years of experience of Mother Nature, and our bodies are products of that. Vaccines are not. They're products of 100 to maybe 200-year-old industry. If you go back to Pasteur, you could give it a few hundred years, but it's nowhere near the millions and even billions of years of wisdom that's gone into creating the kind of equilibrium and diversity within nature that allows us to be healthy even when faced with novel pathogens. So this is true proof here. Israel is an advanced country. Nearly 80% of them were vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine, at least among adults. The kids, obviously, that were 12 years and younger were not vaccinated. But again, look at this line here in the Israel National News. Let me go ahead and pick this up so we can hopefully move this up. Here we go. All right, let's see here. All right, no, we don't want that. Okay, let's see if we can put that up. No, we're not getting it. Okay. So by contrast, Israelis who were vaccinated were 6.72 times more likely to get infected after the shot than after natural infection. It gives the data there. And that's important. It's also important to see that's the strength of the response and the strength of protection of natural immunity versus in this case, mostly Pfizer-based immunity. How long does it last? Natural immunity in studies has been shown to last 9 months and counting. And I'll do another series of videos that shows that natural immunity has helped people deal with this, even people who weren't ever exposed to either SARS-CoV-1, which is now shown to last for 17 years and help dealing with SARS-CoV-2. That was the original SARS, but also people who never contacted SARS at all, but had related coronaviruses and developed through their natural broad-based integrated natural immunity a response to SARS-CoV-2. We will take a look into that. But how about the vaccines, which are the more targeted ones? Okay, so here's what happened. Okay, this is Dr. John Campbell. I'll move mine over to the side, the other side here, so we can read a little bit better. Big implications from Israel. Dr. John Campbell does summaries of these kinds of things. He's pretty even-handed. He'll bring out the challenging information, but generally speaking, he'll also bring out the information that he believes supports vaccinations. But this, make no mistake, down from 90% Pfizer down to 39% protection against infection. Again, does that sound like vaccine success to you? It is if you're a company wanting to make booster shots and make more profit. Make something that has planned obsolescence built right into it. It turns out that Pfizer vaccine and these in particular, and the other ones less so, but also having the same problem, have seriously diminished effectiveness against infection. Look at this. This is more than a 50%. This is a 51% decrease. A 51% point percentage decrease, but overall it's more than half. The effectiveness has been cut in more than half. And here's what's more important too. Symptomatic infection, right? 41%. So now you can get sick from this virus in ways that have notable symptoms in only in 59% of the people, and only 41% are protected from symptomatic infection. Now, again, it still does pretty well with the very sick and hospitalized, but we'll see that also natural infection, especially among younger, healthier people, does well with that too, even if they aren't vaccinated. And certainly if you're exposed to the disease, you have a lasting protection. So if you look down into the actual data here, what's remarkable is this part right here. Not only is the total protection down to 39%, but the sooner you took the vaccine, the weaker your protection. In fact, the people who took it first in January are down to 16% protection. Those in February, 44%, those in March, 67%, those in April, 75%. And what we note in this is that basically in 6 months, the effectiveness is waning, and that's why Pfizer is now promoting a booster shot. Now, does that have problems? Can too many booster shots provide a problem with regard to us and our natural immunity? The answer to that is yes. Mostly we'll take care of that from another video. But again, this is the Times of Israel, and they reiterate that the new health ministry indicates that on average the Pfizer shot, the vaccine given to nearly all Israelis, is now just 39% effective against infection and only 41% effective in preventing symptomatic COVID. So it's not going to keep you from getting sick, and it's not going to keep you from getting infected. And as we see with the viral loads being as high among the vaccinated as unvaccinated, it will not keep you from passing it on to others. So the main case about herd immunity and about the importance of vaccines is being undermined by the actual reality that these vaccines don't seem to be handling the Delta variant very well. And as we saw in that Atlantic article, the parent thought it was a success. I wouldn't define it that way. I leave it up to you to define what you think is success in this matter. But again, here's the paper that this was drawn from. And again, the kind of propaganda around the actual titles. This is comparison of two highly effective mRNA vaccines for COVID-19 during the periods of alpha and delta variant prevalence. Well, it did okay against the alpha one, but then the delta variant came along, and here is the result. However, in July, the effectiveness against infection was considerably lower for the mRNA 1273. Okay, I think that's the one that has to do with Moderna. And even more pronounced reduction in effectiveness for the BioNTech or the Pfizer vaccine. Again, here it is, confirmed 42% right there with a 95% confidence interval. We're talking really, really fairly dramatic decline here. What does this mean and what does this say? Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, we're going to go into the National Scott News. The case had always been, okay, so it doesn't protect you from getting infected. Okay, so it doesn't protect you from giving it to others. Or its ability to do that is declining so rapidly that it's reaching equivalents of people who are non-vaccinated. Okay, it doesn't protect you necessarily from getting symptoms either. So you'll get sick. But the big push now has always been, but wait. Forget all that stuff we promised you in the past. I was going to stop things. We're going to reach herd immunity if enough people got vaccinated. It's going to still save you from being hospitalized. It's going to still save you from dying. And here we find that is beginning to wane as well. COVID in Scotland, hospitalizations among the vaccinated elderly rising quickly. Okay, and here's the go-to line. The data published yesterday, and again, this is fairly recent. We're talking, let's see here, 22nd of July. So it was when Delta variant was fully fledged, but that's about a month old. The data published yesterday revealed that there was nearly as many admissions of fully vaccinated patients as unvaccinated patients in Scotland's hospitals last week. So the hospitalization, at least in Scotland, and at least in some other areas, is beginning to go out the door. Now, is this a case in the United States? Okay. Yes, this is the case in the United States. We've talked about it. This 42%, oh wait, I think I skipped over this. I did skip over this. That 42% didn't have so much to do with Israel. I was going to go back to the United States here. I just unfortunately skipped right over that. So that 42% of Pfizer effectiveness has to do not with Israel, but with the United States of America. Okay, and here's from the Defender. This is, of course, Robert Kennedy's site. Oftentimes held as anti-vax, but it's actually quite a sane middle approach with good science. Biden official says that the new study is a wake-up call after Pfizer's efficacy plummets to 42% as the Delta variant takes hold. So there you have it, okay? And there we showed you the paper as well, okay? So that's effectiveness against symptoms. Effectiveness was 51, which was 42%. As we saw in Israel, the effectiveness even against symptoms is only 41%. As we saw with that example with the Atlantic article, with the adults and children going out together, all fully vaccinated adults passing it on to their kids, and 6 out of the 8 kids getting it from a vaccinated adult, that it doesn't actually cause you to be protected from the infection, or at least it's less than a 50-50 chance from passing it on, from getting symptomatic, from passing it on. And now we're seeing, even with Scotland, a rise in hospitalizations to be on par with the unvaccinated. So we have to begin to look at this differently. We don't have to just say, it was all a joke or it's all a conspiracy, but at the same time, we can't simply ignore this data either. Here's more data that's come in, okay? And this is really important as well. This is straight from the CDC's own website. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I'll try to, fine, I did get that up there. Okay. Morbidity and mortality report. New COVID cases and hospitalizations among adults. This is May 3rd through July 25th. Again, about a month old and going over a long span of time before the Delta variant really came in. But even then, even over this span, before the Delta variants really got a foothold, notice this line. The ratio of hospitalizations to cases was moderately lower among fully vaccinated, 13 hospitalizations per 100 cases compared with 19 for the unvaccinated groups. That's not a huge difference. There should be an enormous difference between those two. And again, here's a lot of the problem too. When they say unvaccinated, they're not distinguishing those who've been exposed and developed natural immunity, okay, and those who haven't. We're assuming that most of these people are the first exposure. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be going to the hospital. They would have already gotten some degree of immunity. But if that's the case, it makes it even more stark. If we're talking about unvaccinated people who have not been exposed versus those who have been double vaccinated, okay, double jabbed or single jabbed in the case of Johnson & Johnson, we're not seeing the payoff here in terms of results, having a dramatically different hospitalizations. And that's important because it helps to create informed choice. Now, here's another thing that I showed in one of my other videos. It's just remarkable. This is toward the end of July. And again, you can see that it was posted on August 6th. And it is another CDC data collection. It's not something from some kind of ideologically driven group, unless you consider the CDC ideologically driven. They're going against, I guess you would say, their own positioning, or a pro-vaccine positioning. And here is the relevant study that came from this. During July of 2021, 469 cases of COVID-19 associated with multiple summer events and large public gatherings in the town of Barnstable County, Massachusetts, were identified among Massachusetts residents. Vaccination coverage among eligible Massachusetts residents is nearly 70%. Approximately 3/4, that is 346 of those 469 cases, or 74%, occurred in fully vaccinated persons. Nearly 3/4 of the cases were in fully vaccinated. Now they had a mixture of vaccinations, okay? But here's the interesting payoff here, and then we go down here. It says, overall, this is right here at the bottom, overall 274 people out of the 469 were vaccinated and symptomatic. So this very much mirrors the data from Israel, where they said something like only 41% protection against symptomatic infection. So that means 59% of the people would experience not only breakthrough infection, but also symptoms. And we're seeing that 274, okay, is very close to that 59% margin. If you take 274 divided by 469, it's almost 80% of the vaccinated people, right? 80% basically of 74, and you're going to get very close to that. So we're talking again, and here's even more dramatic, going back to hospitalization. Among the 5 COVID-19 patients who were hospitalized, since none died, 4 out of the 5 were fully vaccinated, okay? So one has to start asking the question, what actual protection are these vaccines providing? And what are the trends? Again, the trends are going the other direction. There's 2 ways to look at this. Pfizer's saying a great way for us to make more money. It's a great success as far as we're concerned. We may have contributed to the stopping in the early year or whatever, 6 months. Well, actually, it's only been about 6 months. So 6 months of vaccination. Now we're going to make a booster and we're going to make even more money and we're going to, quote, save more lives. And others are saying, wait a minute, why are we rewarding failure with more contracts? Now, here's an interesting point here. Are we going to reach herd immunity with these vaccines? It doesn't look like it. About the only way to reach herd immunity is through natural exposure. We already know that. And we already know from flu vaccines that these vaccines are mainly there to help in the short term to prevent catastrophic failure, people who are immune compromised, like elderly people, especially those with underlying conditions. Now, healthy people, we haven't really had that argument. And just as I predicted a year ago, it doesn't look like we will be reaching herd immunity with this COVID-19, with these vaccines and this COVID-19 virus. It is mutating enough to become kind of the worst of both worlds. It doesn't have a season like flus do, because it's a hybrid of a respiratory virus and a blood immune nerve virus. And again, we already talked about the origin of those, probably in a lab, because that combination of genes, a combination of, quote, successful mutations to deliberately infect human beings was not discovered. No evidence was ever uncovered that came from nature. And there's significant, at least circumstantial evidence that it was developed in gain-of-function research in a lab. So now we have a novel coronavirus that has the ability to dramatically infect people up to 8 and 9 times with this Delta variant, and then stay in your system, unlike most respiratory viruses that cycle through and out of your system. Stay in your system like an HIV or a herpes, produce when you get into situations of stress or in situations where maybe your vitamins are low or whatever it happens to be, and transmit it and continue to cycle that. We are now becoming reservoirs for this virus, and when we get put under situations of stress or low health, we can allow that virus to replicate in ourselves and then transmit it respiratorily through aerosols. Whereas most of these blood immune nerve diseases used to only be translated through bodily fluids, either through spit or through, well, mostly not even spit, but through exchange of sexual body fluids, blood exchanges, needles, and so forth. So now we're going to have a real fight on our hands, but the fight is one that's going to lead us to our own health. We now are to the point, I think we've entered a new era in which our own health becomes the most important arbiter of our protection of ourselves and others. If we keep good health, if we keep a good comprehensive immune system, whether you've taken vaccines or not, that involves certain supplements, certain therapies, and certain lifestyle adjustments, better diet, better sleep, better hydration, exercise, and so forth, weight maintenance, we're going to find that that's going to be the only way to really truly maintain and protect ourselves and the people around us. It won't be perfect protection, so even the people around us will have to do the same. Now, how did this rather alarming decline in the effectiveness dealt with? Are people beginning to question these vaccines? The answer is, on an official level, no. They're doubling down. The White House has announced a secure deal for 200 million more COVID vaccine doses. Instead of saying, hey, these didn't succeed, they're saying, hey, let's find some boosters and use the taxpayer money to fund it, to fund these companies. You have to understand that this is the most expensive or most profitable drug ever made. This Pfizer vaccine. We're talking something along the lines of $35 to $40 billion of revenue, and now another 5 to 10 probably coming down the pike in these boosters because the US government is paying for them. Again, one has to begin to recognize, where are we spending our money? Who are we rewarding? It reminds me of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which cost trillions upon trillions of dollars and have now left things worse than before. We can't allow that to happen with our own health, and I would encourage everyone to be very informed on this. So now, what do we have? Here it is, said in plain in USA Today just the other day. Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine becomes first to win FDA's full approval, paving way for boosters and mandates. So now you have the whole system working together without looking at any alternative. They're saying, don't test yourself for antibodies created by natural immunity. Don't even consider natural immunity or people who've been exposed to vaccines as a viable group of people who have immunization that contributes to herd immunity. Don't even look at it at all. Just spend billions and billions and billions more dollars giving money to vaccines whose effectiveness has faded rather than gotten better. After all the promises of herd immunity, protection from infection, protection from symptoms, and now even protection from hospitalization being gradually shot down, the idea is to actually double down. I find that to be not a logical conclusion. You can make your own conclusions about that, and here's the reason why I don't. This is one of the most important papers that I've posted in several of my videos, but the most important thing about this paper that I found to be really interesting was that people in this paper, there was a counterintuitive thing that happened in this paper. I don't have it highlighted, but you can go ahead and read it for yourself. What they found, quite surprisingly, unexpectedly, estimates of influenza-related mortality in this age group also increased during this period. And it said so significantly. People, when elderly people went from 15% to 65% vaccination with flu vaccines, again, these are respiratory viruses that aren't that amenable to these kinds of, I guess you would say, continued or long-lasting immunity, the mortality actually went up. There is a cost to be paid with too many vaccines and too many boosters if it occupies your immune system. So there has to be a calculus, a balance here. And this calculus is not being addressed right now, and especially around age-related immunity with regard to the COVID-19, because the damage is very, very age-skewed. Literally almost nothing with people that are 18 or younger. Almost no hospitalization, no death. We'll do another video to show that with updated material. And here's the other part here, okay? And that is natural immunity doesn't need a booster. Natural immunity, even people who got natural immunity to SARS-CoV-2 early on against the Wuhan form on the West Coast and so forth, have lasting immunity to variants, against 23 variants. And this is, again, fairly recent, July 5th. So there is a trade-off here. There is a trade-off in trying to be very specific in targeting something and having that target move, and having a much more comprehensive natural immunity to something. And in this particular case, it makes sense to develop vaccines for older people, people with underlying conditions that would be wiped out by an opportunistic invasion of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that would overwhelm their obesity, diabetes, and age. And I know more than a few people who have died as a result of that probably could have benefited from vaccinations in those cases. But when you try to push these vaccines on children and on healthy people under the age of, say, 60 or 50 at least, but pretty much 60, then all of a sudden you are creating a situation in which you may be damaging the long-term prospects for a much more full and comprehensive approach to this. So we need a sane approach to this. Understand vaccines as a tool that have helped and can help, but in a limited way, especially with respiratory viruses. We cannot oversell these. Remember, they oversold them. Said they were going to protect us, said they were going to keep us from giving it to other people, said it would prevent us from getting symptoms, said it would keep us from being hospitalized. All those have turned out not to be true. And they said it would last. It didn't last. So we need to have a conversation on this, on these trade-offs. And I encourage you to put your comments below. You can agree or disagree, or you want to add to that conversation, please do subscribe to my channel, Citizen Zeus. Hit the bell if you want to be notified of videos like this. We need to have this discussion, and we need it to be sane, and we need it to be forward-looking and comprehensive, and not simply just reactive and ultimately cynical or ultimately nihilistic. We need to use this as information to build our own health. So that's what I would leave you with. Let's have that conversation. Let's have that conversation. Let's bring our facts together. Let's bring our opinions and our understanding together. Let's create a multi-tiered, multifaceted approach that allows ourselves not to be pigeonholed ideologically into one position or another, but to have one that works the best for everybody involved. Again, I hope this message has been helpful for you. And until next time, this is Citizen Zeus signing off and wishing you truth, sanity, and good health. We'll talk to you later. Bye.